Hi guys, just a little disclaimer here. This video I noticed once I'd finished recording it, I think it might be a little bit on the sort of boring side, and so I just wanted you to be aware that it's not an exciting tutorial. It's not going to necessarily show you the ins and outs and the specific how-to or anything like that. It's just an overview, and it's designed just to show you the steps of how I went from nothing to the finished product in a sort of general broad sense. There's a few times when I'm like going through the software, and because there's so much that I had to learn to do this, I would and then immediately forget it, and so I'm like, click on this thing, and then maybe and I can't remember, and I sort of fumble over my sort of like words, but yeah, I just want you to be aware that this takes you through the broad steps rather than anything specific, like when you're inside ZBrush, click on this and click on that. It's not going to be like that kind of tutorial. So I just wanted to make that clear from the start, and so that I don't get downvoted. So I hope you enjoy whatever it is that I've put together, and hope that you learn from it. Thanks a lot. Greetings everyone, and welcome to this video where I will be going behind the scenes and showing you how I made this Grayskull image, and also this Grayskull image. So what we'll be talking about is all of the different processes that I went through, and there was a lot. You're talking 3D Studio Max, Oculus Medium, Cinema 4D, 3D Coat, ZBrush, Photoshop. So yeah, an awful lot of stuff. And it was really hard to keep track of it, but I wanted to go through all of the different processes, design work, and techniques, and all of that. There's nothing so much in real time, but I just wanted to show you some of the models, the preliminary models, and just go through some of the techniques and my thought processes behind it all. Okay, so I guess we should start with why I decided to make this piece. So I'm a big He-Man fan, and I grew up in the 80s and loved the cartoons, collected the figures and all that kind of stuff. And so sometimes I will have done some He-Man related artwork before, and you can see that on my portfolio. I've done some Castle Grayskull pieces, and I always hoped that there would be a movie that would come out, and recently they did announce that they were going to do a movie, and so I was like, oh, because I wanted to put something out there that was worthy of the He-Man fans, and a design that would be perhaps realistic enough to be in a movie or something like that. I don't know. I just knew that these days, a lot of when remakes come out, it's usually a big disappointment, and the fans get angry. And I wanted to have my say before I even saw anything, so that if the movie came out and it was terrible or whatever, I could say, well, I didn't get any inspiration from it. Or if it was amazing, then I could say, well, my design didn't have any inspiration from that movie. So yeah, I just wanted to sort of do my bit, because as a long-time fan, and as we know, the 80s movie wasn't very good. We all know that. Tongue-in-cheek, kind of funny, kind of fun, but it didn't really do justice to the actual He-Man story. So I thought, this is my kind of chance. So I had an image in my head of this big sort of ominous-looking castle that you would look up to, and so I started out just doing a design like this, and I kind of spent this was just, I went straight into a full kind of painting. It wasn't really much of a design process, but I just went straight into this one design. It's kind of reminiscent of the original one, but with a different scale. I wanted it to be bigger, but in my head I kind of kept on seeing something that was tall that you'd look up at, and I couldn't. I sort of went from here and I went into these designs, just trying to explore different sort of design languages and different shapes and that kind of thing. the first, I ended up like deleting these because they're sort of very uninteresting, and this was the final design sheet with the sort of better designs. And I kept on trying to go tall, but it just wasn't working because the central focus for me is the skull. And if you start making the building too tall, the skull becomes like less of the focus. And so again here, like I had these like really massive towers, but I kind of wanted to keep it the focus all around the skull. Especially to then look up at the thing, you know, it's gonna be hard to get all of that into one shot. So I started to explore the idea of what if Grayskull was on like a big rock or a mountain or something like that. And so by the time I got to kind of here, I felt like I was settled on kind of something along the lines of this, but I wanted the towers. This is why I was going back and forth between these two, because they're sort of similar. So we have this kind of like mist, which is key, but I didn't quite like the idea that the skull was by itself. I still wanted those towers, and so I picked this. I went for this as a semi-final choice, and then refined it in this stage. And this is the final design, which I kept somewhat to, with the sort of like the skull. I kept these guys and the towers, and I really like what you don't get when you're doing like these kind of this kind of black and white silhouette is like the full use of atmosphere. There's a little bit here, but when I started to add in some smoke and some atmosphere, it really started to separate all the forms. So I knew that it needed that in the final rendering to really make all of these forms kind of stand out. And I knew that I wanted like spiky rocks and tall protrusions. And here's the side view. And I kind of wanted it to look a little bit organic here. There's like a spine kind of motif, as if this is like a fossilized skull or something like that. And so with that, I was now tasked with how the hell do I build this thing? Because I'm not like the best 3D artist in the world, but I know that this has to be full 3D. I wanted it to be, my vision was also that I wanted it to look realistic, as though it was maybe like a still from a movie. So I knew that I couldn't just paint it, and because of the angles that I wanted, I also couldn't just paint it in Photobash, because it's very, very hard to find anything in this kind of angle and this kind of light. I just knew that I had to level up my 3D skills and just spend a lot of time on it. So speaking of time, there was one thing that I did sort of tell myself when I was making this, which was to, usually when I'm making a piece, I will say, well, how long is that going to take? And if that takes like a week, then that's kind of a bad thing. And if it takes 2 weeks, it's a terrible thing. And because clients aren't going to be able to, if you're doing work that takes 2 weeks, and a client comes to you and they say, oh, I like that, can you make that? Then it's kind of useless. But in this case, I just ignored that, and I just wanted to say to hell with the time, and just level up and learn what I could, try different things, just not think about time, just focus on the final finished piece. And so because of that, I was then able to set about whatever was the way to get the best 3D result for the castle, as opposed to what's the fastest, because usually you're going to have to compromise a lot. So from this stage, I was then, well, from here, once I'd figured out what I wanted, I then had to look at reference. And I have a buddy online who helped me sort of look out for some reference, and his name is Quentin. Maybe I don't. His name's French, and I'm not good at French names, but it's this guy, Quentin. Maybe I don't know. But he's like a really good artist, and he has a Patreon, and I recommend you go and check that out. And so I was following his work and like chatting with him online. He's quite open to being talked to, and so he helps me out with some of the inspiration for this. And he pointed me in the direction of Dylan Cole and the guy Dusso. I don't know his first name. Is it Yannick Dusso? So here, let me see where the yeah. So I may confuse the two because I put all of my inspiration into one folder, but I gather that this is Dylan Cole, and this was one of the main inspiration pieces for my painting. And this is like a highly detailed matte painting, brilliant mood, very subtle palette. And this piece too I really love. And I don't honestly know what is 3D and what is photo, but it's extremely detailed. Lighting's great, mood is great. Some more stuff. I think this is Dylan Cole. Some Lord of the Rings stuff. Again, just getting an idea that you can make something in 3D without having to like texture. I think I would guess that this was probably rendered out at grey, and or maybe a basic texture thrown in, like a basic tile, but then it was painted over in Photoshop, which gave me some confidence that I didn't have to like worry about UV unwrapping everything. This was giving me some more ideas for composition. How did I want the castle? Did I want it far? Did I want it near? Just various other little ideas like the lighting. Could it be really dark and the light just comes from the top, just illuminating this subtle kind of form? Originally, I wanted this to be my original sort of composition, even though this is sci-fi. I thought that this kind of looked like a face, but it didn't quite work for the final result. Once you get into the 3D programming, you can start orbiting around. You can pick out ideas that you perhaps look better than what you originally had intended. And so this is another one looking at. So yeah, just lots of stuff. Okay. So okay, what I want to get onto next from here is I just needed to do a very basic blocking in 3D Studio Max, and this is what it looked like. Super simple. Just bear in mind that when I'm doing this, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know quite how to get to where I'm going. I'm just guessing. And so my first thought is, I knew that I wanted to get into Oculus Medium at some point because I needed to do some rocky sculptures, and it is the best program for that. But it's not great for doing architectural stuff like hard cylinders. So I thought I can spatially I can get everything where I want it, proportionately in 3D Studio Max, and I can just create a cylinder super easy, and then export it to Medium, which is a new process for me. But I was just exploring. I didn't know whether it was going to work or not. I was just trying. So this is funny because it's like this is a skull that I downloaded, and that's from a previous very crude modeling of Grayskull's face. And I just literally just slapped the two together just to get an approximation. And that, as crude as it is, that formed the basis of the actual final sculpture. So I exported this and imported it into Medium. And so we'll go into that next, and I'll show you how I sculpted it, how I sculpted the rocks. And I did the whole skull, the preliminary skull sculpt in there too, as well as some of the turret pieces. And so yes, let's go into Oculus Medium. Okay, so here we are inside Medium, and Medium is great for certain things, and this is one of them. Making rocks, cliffs, especially if you are not going to necessarily use them as an in-game asset and have it be super polished. If you're going to use it as a basis for something else,
perfect. Again, like in my opinion, rocks, cliffs, and that kind of organic rocky structure. It doesn't come up all the time. Often you need stuff, you're like, oh, I wish I could do that in medium. But when you need this, it's perfect. There's nothing that can compare to it. So as you can see, we've got this nice kind of like rock formations, and we can make it bigger and we can look around it. I even went to the trouble of like giving it a basic sort of paint, just to sort of like get the impression that it's a bit more worked up. I like to be able to see things as though they're sort of, not just completely crude. I want to be able to get a fair idea of what it might look like. So I'd go in and create a sort of occlusion, some darkness in the occluded areas and that kind of thing. And these rocks, pretty simple. Um, you could just go to rocks, and then just pick something. And then, whoa, what's happening? Just do something like that. Pick a better color. And just do something like that. It's pretty simple. And you can do whatever you want. Just go nuts. And sometimes, if you want to, you can create, if you wanted to create a particularly, detailed piece of rock, whatever. I'm not going to go to any details here. But let's just say this was like a rock that you particularly liked. And you like that, and you wanted to just stamp that rock around. Well, if you made it on a new layer, which I didn't. Okay, so what I wanted to show you a minute ago, I had to just take a minute to reorientate myself because I always forget these things. But I made like a really crappy, crude rock here, and then you have to make it on a separate layer, so it's layer 2, and then you go to stamp, and now I have that as a stamp. And so if I liked a particular rock shape, I could just use that and stamp it around. And it's surprising how much variety you can get with, and that's what I've learned about this whole process. If you have rocks, one rock could do like almost a whole scene. You'd see some repetition, but if you're just constantly adding, like that's one brush essentially, you're going to see repetition there. Like maybe if I just do that and then use it to cut. So that's essentially how I did this. You'll see that I imported the model of the 3D Studio Max here. You've got this, when a model gets imported, it gets a little bit destroyed as it turns into the medium kind of mesh, but I literally just needed it as a basis just to get an idea. And these are on separate layers. So you can see if I hide that, that's the base, and then you got the rocks. So that when they get exported, they're actually different objects that you can then isolate. And I'll show you later how I used these rocks here in Cinema 4D when I was setting up the scene, just to add some variety. And one of the things that I learned was, if you're going to do a scene like this, don't do one layer and one object with like 20 rocks. Just really all you need is like 3 or 4 big rocks, and then export each one and arrange them in the rendering software, because you're not going to see, like in the actual scene and like here or something, you don't see any of it, and it'll just save you some time. So what I'll show you now is see how I did the sculpt skull. So if we go like maybe to number 2 or something. So I brought in my reference here on the left, something that I've never done before, but I've seen other people do it, so I think it would probably be handy because I did want to work from it. I got symmetry on, that's important. And so this is kind of where it got to. Let's see if I can just hide that symmetry. Oh dear, can't. Oops, how do I? A mirror plane and like, so you get a rough idea. It's very blobby, but you know it formed a really good basis, and you can pull on it using the move tool. Don't even know what layer I'm on. Mine rocks Grayskull. You know, if you wanted to change it, there's a few times when I did that. It's a little bit slow. If you want to like to pull the teeth down or something like that. So I believe what I ended up doing was exporting this whole thing, and just slicing out everything except the skull, deleting it, and then working on the skull in detail in 3D coat. I'll just check if I've got a more recent file. So this is good to see actually, because it's the final sculpt where I had it a little bit more detail. I tried to get as much detail as I could in this stage, but it's very hard to get granular detail in medium. Uh, it's kind of blobby, it's kind of smooth, and because you're, oops, let's try and figure out what layer I'm on. Grayskull blocking. Let's choose clay and pick a brush. I actually have, I think, quite a high density in the mesh, and then the mirroring is probably off. So maybe if I turn that off. So it's very hard to get super fine details. You end up carving, like, even with a small brush, it kind of does this where you get like an ugly hole. I'm sure if you went in and maybe super zoomed in, but it's leaving quite, I don't feel like I have control over it. It's, you know, it's like all kinds of like ugly mesh there. So I will get it to about this stage and then export it. And so we'll go now into 3D Coat, and I'll show you how I took the skull to the next level.
Okay, before we go into 3D Coat, I actually wanted to show you the process from Cinema 4D, because I didn't do the skull next once I'd got the basic block in and I did the basic rock shapes. I then exported those from Oculus Medium and then brought them into Cinema 4D and just tried to get the composition right, because I started to realize that once I picked my camera angle, in this case I think it was something like, maybe not that, this isn't the final file, this is an early file, so it was something like that. I started to realize, well, I should only really be modeling what I'm going to see. So I started to kind of just like look around the scene and then duplicate rocks. It's all about, when you find your camera angle, moving the rocks to that angle. This is an important thing, because, and what I learned in this process, there was a lot of like, oh, I'm going to make the whole scene and then put a camera around it to find the right angle. And then you end up wasting all this time making all these rocks that you're never going to see. And so instead, you kind of have to make just enough that you can pick a camera angle that you want, and then have enough separate pieces, because this is what was difficult, was a lot of these are all like one, see, that's just one piece, so you can't really have much control over it. So make separate pieces and then pick the camera angle. So in this case it was this one, and then you'll know, right, okay, I might need a rock here, I might need a rock there, I can spin this rock around, and you can just start to tailor to whatever is in the actual scene itself. So I started to do that, and I think I took these rocks into, I think I took them into 3D Coat to sort of like give them a little bit more tooth, a little bit more texture. Let's just have a look. I think I might have done that. Not 100% sure though. But there was one or two rocks that I think I might have done as like hero rocks. I think I might have, yeah, I remember like bringing this, I remember bringing this into 3D Coat and then cutting out certain pieces of it because there were some rocks that I liked, like back here, and I remember like lassoing and splitting out those rocks and giving them a little bit of an extra treatment and then bringing them back in, and they may be in a later version. So I also added some volumetrics here, and the whole scene was rendered using Redshift and had volumetrics turned on. But I didn't, I mean, it doesn't really show up in the render at all. If I show you the some of the work in progress images, so this is like the raw render, and there's like a lot of volumetric fog, but it really didn't help, because in fact it hindered, because I wanted to have like a dark sky with some dark clouds as per the reference images that I showed you before, like this. And so now if you put like a dark sky behind that, this is super bright, so that needs to be darkened down, and then this is bright, and then kind of screwed up the whole value arrangement. So I think it helps with the vision as you're looking at it. You're like, oh, I can see the mood now. But when you go to actually paint it up, it's all too baked in. So I think in the future I would probably not use the fog and just have to use my imagination and hope that when I get to the Photoshop stage that I can just put whatever volumetrics I need in there. And also like an early test render, like this one, there's some volumetric fog in there, and it gives you like a good idea while you're in there. But it's kind of like a crutch really, because you're at this stage you're insecure and you need to know that the finished image is going to work, and it can save time if you just take a leap of faith and just say, well, I don't need all of this, it will just look good in Photoshop when I paint over it. So so that's Cinema 4D, and the general the stage was build out these rocks, bring them in here, get the composition right. Then I'll know what I need to work on. So I would then perhaps go into 3D Coat, do a few rocks, and then import those. If I bring in final one, it might look a little bit more close to the finished. So here we are in the final file with the skull kind of textured and everything like that. I'm trying to see if I can notice anything obvious about the rocks that I brought in. It's difficult because they can look so detailed in 3D Coat, but then very smooth when you bring them into Cinema 4D. But it really didn't matter, because in the end, I really probably just needed, I think most of the time, with some few exceptions, I really just needed the silhouette of the rock, and then I could do the rest in photographs. Like all of this is just photographs, 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 and this here shows a little bit, maybe this and maybe this shows a bit of the original render coming through, but it's not necessary. So into 3D Coat, and this was the skull. So this was going from Oculus Medium straight into here to build out some volumes, and here I could make teeth and have a bit more control a bit more control over where the teeth go. So we have all these layers here. We've got teeth, originals, and I merge them into one. So then you can afford to, I think I sculpted out these cavity areas here, and then place the teeth in. And then from here, this was just an experimental thing, but I was feeling like I couldn't quite get the fine granular detail in 3D Coat. I'm sure a better sculptor could do that, but in ZBrush it's just that bit better or easier, I think, to get some of the, you've got the erosion tools and all that kind of stuff. I can't remember what it's called, surface tools, is it? And you can put noise, all that kind of good stuff. And it just looked a little bit more rocky, a little bit more detailed. And as you can see, I didn't even sculpt a door because I just knew that from the angle that I was at that you wouldn't be able to see it. Okay, so from ZBrush I would then bring it, this was a very arduous workflow because I then brought it back into 3D Coat to paint, and painting in 3D Coat and then exporting high poly meshes with ugly topology is extremely complicated. I would not recommend that. I would recommend putting just I don't know, if you can get away with just exporting it with no texture somehow, just putting a basic texture on in the 3D program and just using the paint. I'm just going to see what my raw render looked like again, just to see if you even see the texture. So if I go to here, let's try maybe this shot. You can sort of see it, I guess. You can see that I had some dark in the cavities, but there are some, depending on what you're rendering with and what shaders you're using, some shaders can have occlusion in cavities and then curvature, different colors on the curvature or the bulge, depending on what the terminology of the program is. Ideally, if you can if you're not really into making game assets and spending hours and if not days trying to take a 6 million poly mesh down into a 50k mesh and having it still look good, because that's an art in itself, I would just not recommend painting in 3D Coat. I was lucky that I had the help of the 3D Coat Discord. Without them I would not have been able to do it at all because it was so involved and so complicated. Okay, so this is the painted version. It does look pretty good. It looks really good in 3D Coat, and that's the illusion. You see, that's the tricky part. Is you'll be in 3D Coat, you'll set up a really cool render. You'll be like, this is amazing, and then trying to get it out of here is absolutely painful. I can barely. There's so much information that I have to take in that I can barely remember it. But I think it came in at maybe 3 million or something, and then it exported it at maybe 500,000, something like that, which is a gamble because you can 3D Coat will crash constantly if you're trying to export things that are too much for it to handle. And luckily I managed to get through with maybe just 1 or 2 crashes. So this was exported with all the textures, brought into Cinema 4D, rendered using Redshift with fog turned on, and then, like I say, the raw render looks like this for the second shot. So just compare the two. And as you can see, I just got rid of the sky, the value changed it again. I managed to get a nice bit of texture on these rocks. Kind of useless, really. Maybe I kept some of these, maybe just because it kind of does look okay at a distance, with a little bit of editing. but you know, this is not a very good looking rock. And what I learned was you shouldn't really be trying to make realistic rocks in 3D, because if you want to make a realistic image, because photos are just going to beat it every time, and you can spend hours trying to make the right rock in 3D. Your best bet would maybe be to get some photogrammetry of a rock, so that it's at least as realistic as a real like photograph, as long as it's got a nice silhouette, which you can always edit in post. But as you can see, like all of this changed, all of that is completely different. And like I say, I kept a little bit of this. And so what I'd like to talk about next is these turrets. These turrets were a huge challenge, and I didn't know what to do. I spent like a long time just thinking how am I going to do these turrets. And what I did was, let's see if I can find the file wall. I don't know which is the most recent one. I don't know. I'll try this. So there we are. I think it was this one, but if not, it was something very similar to it. I just got a I don't know what they're called, stencil, or you know, where you drag a rectangle using. I think you pick an alpha. So my apologies for forgetting this, but it's standard. It's standard ZBrush procedure. You pick a rock alpha. I think I got it from here. Just like import, and I've actually. What is worth noting is this rock wall here was from Quixel Megascans, and it was taken from their free Castle wall thing that you can download. So I took the the displacement from that, imported it into ZBrush as an alpha, and dragged it out. I had to do it by hand. It was quite tricky because it's a big file and this mesh was dense. But I knew that what I would be doing with this is bending it around using a bend modifier, and that you wouldn't see the seams. It didn't have to be a fully perfect 360 cylinder. So I took that and brought it into Cinema 4D and used a very crude bend. It didn't even like touch it around the back. So maybe I'll still have that. Okay, so this is the wall that was imported. I can't remember the texture that I put on it. I think it was just a generic kind of, I think it was possibly the wall texture that came with the Quixel Megascans, which didn't necessarily line up exactly. It was just a very approximate kind of texture, just to get a stony kind of feel. And then, so this is it before the bend gets put on, and then after, and there you have a turret. And again, the raw render looks like that, which is more than adequate, I think, especially if you then paint over the top, and then you end up with that kind of result. So yeah, that's pretty much most of the process, really. You know, the Photoshop painting was just pretty standard, like finding rocks, finding mountains. One thing that helped was using a couple of reference packs. There was photobash.org. Okay, so I was recommended by a few people actually to go to this person's Gumroad. I'm not going to try and pronounce that name. And I downloaded Rocky Cliffs. I didn't necessarily use too much of that because I did have some of my own, but there was a few good ones in there. And then I also, from photobash.org, I got the Dramatic Skies, which was quite helpful. They got some quite nice skies in there. So this was like a mixture of like 3 or 4 And so what I'll do now is I'll walk you through the process of the sort of shot creation. So in Photoshop, so this was the raw render, first trying to get the sky right. The sky is the most important thing because all the values are going to follow on from what the sky is doing. And so at first I put a sky in, and this definitely needed to be darkened down. And then I got the general feel for the sky, and then started to place in some of the textures. Added some foreground here. And from this point on, it didn't give me much trouble. The whole rest of the process was very, it was like new and kind of stressful and trying to figure it all out. But from this point on, it was pretty straightforward, just adding in textures, clouds. And it's also about finding the right rocks. You can't just put in any old rock. It has to like match the sort of rocks have to kind of match up a little bit, and quality has to be right, and the lighting has to be right. So as straightforward as it is, you still have to be very careful. And then picking the right clouds. This was I think I downloaded like a misty mountain pack, and I extracted some of the mist from those and then painted those in. So at this stage I showed it to my friend Quentin, and he had a few critiques, one of which was that this rock was too round, not in keeping with the design language of these rocks, and that this rock here was a little bit too plain and clean compared to the jagged ones, and that the sky wasn't quite right. And so he helped me to sort of take it to that next level. And then I added in He-Man. So the He-Man thing was interesting. That was actually using, what are they called? Anatomy 360. Anatomy 360. I downloaded this male hero. It's only like £5, or I think it's somewhere thereabouts, a few dollars, a few pounds. And you get this software, and you can pick these guys and spin around and light it however you want, and then just take a screen grab and cut it up, and as long as the pose kind of loosely fits in, I think I used that one, turn that into a sword. You can change the rim light angle. Obviously, you're limited to what poses it comes with. It comes with about 10 or so. But you could use it as a basis. You could start off with that and then add all kinds of different photographic elements to tweak the pose. But it was just useful for what I needed. I knew when I saw the poses that it came with, I thought, I don't think I'm going to be able to use that. And like I say, it can just be a basis. And so that's how he got in there. Using some photography and a bit of paint. This is kind of loose because I knew it was going to be small. So that's the process for the first one. And the second one was even more straightforward because there's a lot less elements. Raw render, trying to get the sky, and adding some mountain textures, foreground, more rocks, a lot more atmosphere, color correction, and then that's it. So I think that does it all. So yeah, I hope you like it. Give me a comment, let me know what you think, and hope you learned something. Just remember that if you want to sort of like level up and get to the next level, improve your skills, sometimes you have to just take your time. This in total was a good few weeks worth of just sort of explorations, and I discovered new workflows through that. So you'll just have to be careful when somebody says, and they always do, how long did that take? You'll just have to kind of edit your response accordingly. Okay, so I hope you like that. If you did, just give me a like and maybe subscribe, and yeah, thanks for watching. Cheers.